there's a lot more to what we can do when we have like a nuclear reactor supporting Bitcoin mining, financed by Bitcoin, and then also like facilitating flows and payments as well. Oh, it's such an effective tool. Like there is literally power plants that have just like a resistive heater, just a large load bank of resistive heaters to take excess load. That is all we are proposing to do, is replace technologies like that with Bitcoin miners. The interest in nuclear power has been reinvigorated, but there's a lot of catching up to do, especially in the West and on the supply chain and the labor fronts. Whereas in the East, we're seeing Russia, China, India, they're actively building nuclear reactors. They've sustained their capabilities and they're enhancing them every day. And when is the time going to come when we start measuring energy in like sats per kilowatt hour? That's going to be an interesting transition. I'm going to take those 2 time points and I'm going to put in what did it cost at Bitcoin at that point. And if you measured it in terms of Bitcoin, cost went down by 30%. In the summer, you're only using 5 megawatts. So for a lot of the year, if you have 10 megawatts of nuclear power installed, you can go as low as only needing 5 megawatts. You have to find something that can fill in that margin. So Bitcoin mining isn't the ideal candidate to do that.
Before we get into that, maybe give the viewers or the listeners some quick overview of like who you are and why you're excited about Bitcoin.
So, hi everyone. This is my second time here speaking with Robin, and my name's Ryan McLeod. I'm a chemical technologist that works in the nuclear industry, particularly at Canadian nuclear laboratories, where I support various research and safety and monitoring programs for the CANDU reactor fleet, which basically is Canada's unique reactor type that was invented here in Canada. And it has a unique feature that it doesn't require enriched uranium, which is one of the reasons why it is considered a very like safe and high quality technology that has been deployed several places around the world. But Canada, we kind of stopped building them after the Chernobyl reactor in Romania back in about 2003, I think was the last CANDU reactor that was built. But anyways, my job is supporting various activities that monitor the health and status of those reactors. And while I do that, I operate a bunch of machines that allow me to listen to podcasts while I work. So I listened to Bitcoin and then learned more about the broader nuclear landscape and the challenges that it faces, especially when nuclear power is looking into deploying a technology called small modular reactors that are smaller reactors that can apply to smaller markets, but the challenge is making sure that they can be cost efficient and they can have enough demand where they're deployed to support them economically. So I've taken a lot of interest in that area of nuclear economics and applying Bitcoin to it in my spare time while I listen to podcasts doing my job.
Awesome. Yeah. You even I saw you gave a talk at El Salvador where we met. I mean, it's already half a year ago. The time flies by so quickly. You're doing are you also doing a lot of talks and seeing what is developing with Bitcoin mining and nuclear?
Yeah, I pay a lot of attention to stuff going on in the Bitcoin mining space to stay apprised of like how quickly that is maturing in these different markets where evolving, and how it's being used in the ERCOT market for load balancing, how it's being used in northern communities for heat reuse, and seeing how the form factors are maturing for more standard data centers, how all of this is kind of coming together in a way that is going to be a lot more accommodating to a typically risk-averse sector like nuclear power, to bring them together, because the way that Bitcoin mining was done, a little more like cowboy style, doesn't jive well with the way that nuclear power is done, very safe, very regimented, very bureaucratic, and it's going to require a lot more maturity in these markets, which now we're seeing with a lot of the developments, basically of the talks from at the Texas Energy and Mining Summit, the Nashville Energy and Mining Summit, where they're actually having policymakers and grid managers talking about how they're using this technology and Bitcoin mining's flexibility to incorporate into their grids and make it more economical and make it more resilient and more reliable power systems for their customers, and taking the lessons that they're learning and molding it into a vision of how we can start applying that to nuclear power. And then on the flip side, I'm paying attention to a lot of the developments in nuclear power, how it's getting a lot more attention now, how like lots of countries want to continue building big reactors. AI is looking for a lot of power, so that's getting a lot more attention for the type of power load that nuclear power can offer. But then there's also the small reactors. So there's a lot of multi-prongs that I'm paying attention to and seeing a lot of synergy in places where Bitcoin and nuclear power will work very well together, especially on like mining, and then capital formation and capital preservation are three like really good places that Bitcoin is going to apply to supporting nuclear power going forward. And that's where my attention is.
Interesting. This like mixing of this cowboy Bitcoin mining with this highly regulated nuclear energy industry. I never looked at that way. Interesting.
It's yeah, the convergence are starting to happen. Like when we're seeing companies like TeraWulf working with the Susquehanna power reactor in that area and selling uh, that data center that they were working on to Amazon, and then the AI companies like Microsoft purchasing 3 Mile Island's reactor outright because they want all of that power to support a data center. And there's just a lot of talk about the astonishing demand for power that is coming from these new computing technologies, that we needed the power to be available like yesterday, and we kind of dropped the ball, and we hadn't been uh, good like stewardship of this technology over the last 2 decades. Like nuclear power up until about 2021, like late in the year, early 2022, was still kind of looked down upon as just not the type of technology that could do it cost efficiently and in time for saving us from climate change. So the attention has been subsidizing a lot of wind and solar infrastructure at the expense of not supporting nuclear infrastructure as heavily. So it's created like supply chain gaps and like labor gaps. Like when there isn't enough interest in the technology, it doesn't attract talent to be educated in nuclear technology. So you're not bringing as many people through the school system and getting them trained as nuclear engineers as like high degree labor that and tradesmen that we need to build these projects. So there's a lot of recovery on that front that needs to happen when when it doesn't get sustained very well over the years, and you have like the basically there's bull and bear markets in the nuclear sector, but they can last well over a decade, as we've seen like since Fukushima, and now only in the last 3 years the interest in nuclear power has been reinvigorated, but there's a lot of catching up to do, especially in the West and on the supply chain and the labor fronts. Whereas in the East, we're seeing Russia and China and India, they're actively building nuclear reactors. They've sustained their capabilities and they're enhancing them every day and getting better and more efficient and at doing this. And if we don't get our act together in Europe and the West with deploying these technologies to the rest of the world, the Russia and China are going to beat us to it, and they're going to eat our lunch. And it seems to be that is the trajectory that we are on, unless we can turn the ship around real quick.
That's interesting. I also want to get a little bit to like, will we have in the future too much energy? And this debate, I think Gary Cardone was it that said like there will be free electricity at some point because we have so much electricity. But I want to first get a little bit one step behind and saying like, why is nuclear and Bitcoin such a great match for each other? I mean, you're literally a nuclear Bitcoiner. I love the wording, so it's a perfect question.
Yeah, it all started about 4 years ago. So I can say that I've done my first 4 year cycle and it wrapped up around the time of the conference, because it was when the first conference was happening. Whenever nuclear power got brought up in the context of Bitcoin mining, it was within the context of reactors have been shutting down. Germany's shutting down their fleet. Several reactors in the United States had been shut down recently. The Vogel reactor had been taking 10 plus years and it was only just getting finished. And there's another, the project in Finland that was also just recently finished, that are way over budget, way over expected time. So it's puts a kind of a stain on the perspective of the industry. So I had been aware of the action plans that Canada and other countries are putting together to deploy and develop a lot of the small modular reactor technologies. The intent is that they'll be able to be smaller, modularized, container deployable like built mass produced in factories, similar to how we build aircraft and like large cargo ships and whatnot. So there'll just be an assembly line where we can build the reactors and they can be quickly deployed, and then that will start upgrading many of like remote communities and smaller grids off of hydrocarbons and displace those to higher order uses, because we're never going to stop using hydrocarbons. If we just stop using them for electricity, we will be able to use them for more things like hydrogen production, for synthetic fuels and all of that stuff. But I see this playing out kind of like the pioneer species that Brandon Quidden has written about. And the idea is that these SMRs, in many locations that we want to build them, the markets aren't typically big enough to support nuclear power. So we can use Bitcoin mining as an always available, perfectly scaled load that can match any SMR deployment to any location, no matter how remote, whether it's a few megawatts or a few hundred megawatts that we're dealing with. And then one of the key unlocks that Bitcoin mining allows for is that we can treat nuclear power not just as baseload power, which is what is typically done, because we want to always have the nuclear power being consumed 100% of it 24/7. If we need to start like flexing its load and curtailing its load, it starts affecting the economics negatively. So we want to be able to sell all that power all the time. But typically, when you're deploying power to a remote community, you're going to have some variance between their peak demand and their base load demand. And it's in many cases, it can be almost like half the load. You could be using as much as needing 10 megawatts at your like most extreme coldest day of the year, but then in the summer you're only using 5 megawatts. So for a lot of the year, if you have 10 megawatts of nuclear power installed, but you can go as low as only needing 5 megawatts, you have to find something that can fill in that margin. And there aren't that many flexible loads that can just fill that margin anywhere we want in the world. So Bitcoin mining isn't the ideal candidate to do that, is you don't necessarily have to have the top of the line miners. You can have something that's a little bit older, that's a little bit more tolerant to disruption in regards to their economics. And then the key unlock is now we can think about building them bigger, because if now we can build to peak load, we can build to excess future loads that we're considering. If we're expecting a community or an industrial site to grow or like expand its infrastructure and connect transmission lines to more communities, and then as you're adding more local demand, you can offload your Bitcoin mining capacity to another facility, and you can kind of like cascade that together. And as one of these nodes first matures, then you can redeploy into the next node and then into the next node as they they start becoming more just accommodating for higher order power users. Like as the Bitcoin mining comes in first, and then within like the first year you have like a water treatment center, then you've got to service your hospitals, then you start having heavy industry, and all of this starts displacing the Bitcoin miners because they will be higher on the stack of energy utility uses. It's basically just kind of like, if you use the marginal utility argument, like the Bitcoin miners are the first of the stack that will relinquish their power when it's needed by something higher in the community. And it's basically exactly, I want to play out exactly what Gridless is doing, except I want to use it for SMRs, and I want to wrap it around the the action plan that Canada has for this technology. And that's one of the first ways that I started seeing this opportunity. And I started putting that forward. But now I'm starting to see things like these, the Bitcoin treasury companies and nuclear power companies, and these vendors. There's a lot of periods of time where it's kind of, so you're sitting on idle capital waiting for like a licensing procedure to happen before you can start construction. So, and then there's even periods where like you have to consider the waste and remediation and decommissioning at the end of life of these things. So you're going to have to be saving capital for that time that's 40, 60 years in the future, and you want to be able to preserve it. So I'm also arguing that Bitcoin should be part of those funds to preserve that capital long into the future and support those endeavors. And then now we've got things like the bit bonds, and that might be an interesting way for these vendors that want to build this SMR technology to raise capital and have that Bitcoin alongside of it to make it just make it more economically feasible, so that outside and reduce the dependence on like state sponsorship and loan guarantees. I think that there's something there that can work, but all of these elements kind of like play together, because then you can even have the mining feeds into servicing the debt coupons, and you can have like a a Bitcoin flow and a cash flow to service different tranches of investors. And it can get kind of interesting. And I'm hoping to get an opportunity to talk to some of the people that are more immersed in this, to work out to flesh out these ideas better, because I'm not a structured finance expert in any way. So I would like to speak with one so that we can see if there's any way that we can make a product like this feasible for a company that's trying to build this technology. Because I think there's like having energy companies and energy infrastructure companies with like a Bitcoin strategy is going to be a lot more interesting than like a hotel company like MetaPlanet. Like I love what they're doing, but I think there's a lot more to what we can do when we have like a nuclear reactor supporting Bitcoin mining, financed by Bitcoin, and then also like facilitating like flows and payments as well. Because I don't know if you've spoken with Bob Burnett or listened to much of his podcast, but he has these ideas about how block space is going to be a commodity, and then so we can start thinking about it in that way. If you own the power plant, you own Bitcoin mining, and then you're also trading block space commodities to financial institutions, and like it's all maturing and starting to come together, but it's going to require some intrepid pioneers that are adventurous and a little more risk taking in the nuclear space, where typically everything is very risk averse and trying to minimize any uncertainty and like any negative perceptions of the technology. And there's definitely people in the nuclear space that see Bitcoin still as but it's for criminals and it uses too much energy argument. So there's definitely some education to work through to overcome some of those barriers, but we will get there.
For me, energy companies seem to have one of the biggest future potentials for embracing Bitcoin. It's like it would be a no-brainer if they are partnering up, even if they don't do structured finance products, which I think is a great idea, but just like using Bitcoin mining for all sorts of things that they're doing. I think this is a great thing, and we have heard it, I think, multiple times on the podcast from multiple different people, from Lisa Huff, from Bob Burnett, from other people, from Chris Klager, from TerraHash of Germany recently. So many people mentioned that like energy companies are primed to embrace Bitcoin because it solves a real problems from them. Even if they don't like Bitcoin, even if they don't like Bitcoin, they could still use Bitcoin mining.
No, it's such an effective tool. Like there is literally power plants that have just like a resistive heater, just a large load bank of resistive heaters to take excess load. And like that is all we are proposing to do, is replace technologies like that with Bitcoin miners. And like I've been working on a model myself that compares these things, and it shows that if you have the option to sell power, like even at a few cents a kilowatt hour, it the model almost always chooses to sell it instead of like storing it in batteries and displacing like arbitraging it from low demand periods to high demand periods. It typically wants to just sell that power as much as possible, and then you cycle that in to paying for upgrades to the grid and refinancing and the infrastructure, and it almost becomes like self-perpetuating how we can recycle it into each other. And then we see other ways that the Bitcoin mining is being used for like heat reuse. Like there's entire communities in Finland with tens of thousands of people that they replace their electric heaters. We're just heating water and sending it to a community, and that's now been replaced by Bitcoin miners. Like the entire province of Quebec here they're pretty much all electric heat, and they are blessed with abundant hydropower. So there's no excuse that they couldn't start transitioning over to using more Bitcoin mining for heat. And then like out in Vancouver, there's a company called Mint Green that's doing similar. They're finishing whiskey as with the Bitcoin mining heat, like drying logs. Just I've got an S9 behind me that I use as a space heater in the winter. I think that's going to be an added value stream. And then just like the fact that they have that flexibility and they're able to absorb capacity that would otherwise get wasted. Like we set the floor at 4 cents kilowatt hour. Like even if you're running S9s, it's like 2 cents a kilowatt hour that would otherwise not be made back. But now we have like the higher end ASICs, right? Sounds like we're getting sub 10 joules per terahash. So that's like if you just plug that into a wall you're getting almost 20 cents kilowatt hour out of that, even at the low hash prices that we're having right now. Like I think we're at like $50 per petahash per day, which is like where the margins of all the miners out there start to get razor thin. So it is interesting to start seeing the dynamic, like the price goes down and then the difficulty starts changing, and the network adjusts and it moves on, and we we all are all participating in its development and its evolution and how we're fitting into these different systems, power systems, heating systems. It's yeah, it's so big that sometimes like you start thinking about how big it can be, and you get too far into the future and you're like, we have to think about what's going on now. But yeah, because I've let my head get a little too far in the future with this nuclear stuff, because I'm trying to set up the pieces for when we finally get these SMRs going in the next 3 to 4 years, that this is like where it could be. And like the advancements that have happened in the last 4 years, even just since starting to pay attention to this, are like, this is going to be a revolutionary change. But the problem is the markets that it's changing are typically very slow moving. So it's it's not happening everywhere all at once, but it's is happening, and it is starting to put the puzzle pieces together in a way that it's undeniable at this point that we are going to we're witnessing a fundamental change to our energy systems and our financial systems, and the entire global order is up for grabs right now, and Bitcoin seems to be at the center of it, and it's very fun to be a part of it.
It's really fun. It's like we have this energy revolution, we have Bitcoin with the financial revolution, we even have AI, which completely revolutionizes how we work and how we find information and how we process information, and maybe even like how we deploy workforce. The perfect summary for me is always like, what a time to be alive in general.
Oh, it's wild, especially like, yeah, you're a bit younger than me, but I still remember the time before the internet was everywhere, and like going outside was a lot more common, and now it's like now you have to go outside to escape the digital world, and it's almost flipped. Like it was an escape for a while, but now it's become overwhelming and part of our lives. That like, yeah, the AI stuff is amazing. Like I use it quite a bit. Like I don't even Google anymore. Like my first instinct is just ask the question to the AI, and it'll give me a far more uh, concise and organized answer for the questions that I have. And then before you know it, you're having a full on conversation about all these random ideas about like books you're reading, about like ideas that you heard of. Just something just comes up randomly on a podcast, and just this thought, and you just like just plug it into the AI, and you'll get to it better. Back to it later. Or if it's something just deeper, you send it for deep research, and it comes back 30 minutes later with like a PhD level dissertation about whatever the hell you wanted to learn about. And it is interesting seeing people that aren't keeping up with it. Like you use it a lot, so you kind of see that it's improving so quickly, and it's making mistakes less and less. But there's people that used it earlier that were like, oh, it's making mistakes, it'll never work, and then they kind of just like let it go. But then you try to explain to them like, yes, like this AI is doing this stuff. Like, you person that's never coded before, you can just tell the robot what you want, and it will make code for you. The barrier to entry for coding is now like so low that even my wife would be able to do it, and she's never like touched coding before in her life. And it's remarkable what it is going to unlock for people that are actually have the wherewithal and to see where it's going and prepare themselves for it, and actually they gain experience adapting to a world where this exists now, because it's not going away. And we might as well learn how to use it productively and adapt to it while we can, because it's going to be another thing like Bitcoin, where whoever adapts to it earlier is going to be at such an asymmetric advantage to those that don't, that it's like we're almost going to start diverging into like different species, that people that use the robots and people that don't, and there's going to be some divergences, and people that like that completely reject it, and people that go all in on it, and yeah, it's going to get weird, but yeah, let's enjoy the ride.
Some people feel like, oh, like it's a new thing. It's like, yeah, like you can play around with it, but you don't really can do anything specific with it. And probably most of my audience disagrees with that, but I think most of them already like embrace AI also as they embrace Bitcoin. But I want to bring that one example up. I heard Seyr talking at Vegas, and later I heard something even more interesting. He said before he goes to and he has like thousands of lawyers and people that work for him, but before he goes to anyone, he goes to AI, puts in all the situational and context things that he has, and then goes into deep think mode and then lets it work and then interacts with it and then comes up with a plan, what he wants to do. And then only when he has a ready-made plan and made up his mind what he wants to do, then he goes to the lawyer and puts it in execution mode. And he has preferred stock options, the strike, the strive, and the stride, those three. And he said that he made that with AI. Like those came out of AI conversation. That's like, I don't know, like millions, maybe even billions of dollars of wealth that were created in an Michael Saylor AI conversation. And the implications of AI are so huge. And if you think it's a tool to play with, you haven't understood it.
No, and just like thinking about what like that unlock that he has, and it makes you wonder like how much time of his did it save? Because like how much is his time worth? Because that like what he's capable to put together, like that's teams of lawyers and engineers and like financial experts, like weeks of meetings and just reports typically go into creating products like that, and he's just like riffing them off like every other week and doing 90% of the work before the lawyers even have to get their hands on it. Like that's a huge unlock, like because you can just iterate on these ideas so quick. And then there was another guy that was on Breedlove's podcast a few weeks or months ago, and he was talking about how he uses AI to just like embody different personalities. And like he had it like there was like my Charlie Munger bot, and there was the Warren Buffett bot, and there was the Thomas Edison bot, and so it could make it uh, get the perspectives from all of these different personalities in the real world that existed today, their current selves, their past selves, historical figures. He was even talking about how he had created different versions of himself. He had like a present day version of himself that he could communicate with, but then also a past version of himself, and then his projected vision of his future self. And he was able to start incorporating all these ideas and these personalities into his workflow when he needed to like ask about a product or an idea. He would tap into like, okay, I have a stable of these experts that are familiar from this angle, and he can get them to analyze it and get their perspectives. It was like fascinating how much that he was putting into it, and he talks as if he was just like driving in his car, just talking to it, just talking to these personalities, because now like you can even give it their voice. And it's yeah, we're in definitely brave new world crazy territory where I don't think any of the dystopian novels and movies that I've read saw any of this coming. Like we're uh, we're in uncharted territory, and it is very crazy and fun to explore. And like watching shows like Black Mirror, where it's like I used to like the sci-fi that like I like the sci-fi that's like in the future, like projecting things way out in the future. But then when we start getting sci-fi that's like that crazy stuff could be happening now. It's yeah, we're living in weird times where the line between sci-fi and reality is very blurry.
We all have now a Jarvis to help us. Like you're Iron Man fan,
Oh yeah, yeah, I love Iron Man.
and Jarvis is, I think Jarvis it's called, the robot helping him to produce the Iron Man and all those things, the personal assistant basically.
Oh yeah, and just perfectly customized to everything we need. But then like yeah, the double-edged sword is that it is creepy if that is like some centralized entity that's harvesting all of our information and potentially can use it against us. Like we've seen how algorithms can be manipulated to affect people's behavior. So it's yeah, we're going to have to develop strategies to perceive and protect ourselves from like that algorithmic manipulation and the different ways that AI can manipulate our behavior. Because yeah, the books are out there on how we can impact social behavior in various ways, and we've seen it happen in various historical events, the recent and way back. So it's yeah, it's a different world that we are going to have to navigate. And yeah, I think cryptography and Bitcoin are definitely going to be centerpieces of us having to interact with these digital and artificial realities that we're now going to be living in.
How important is something? How important is Bitcoin in an AI world where you cannot know for sure what is real and what is not real, and the only thing that you really can trust and verify is Bitcoin?
Well, that I might need to lean on into the software thesis a little bit, and like the idea of like the being able to protect your digital life with like almost a cyber dome that you'll have to you use like a Bitcoin checkpoint with you cannot access the information without a cost. The Yeah, kind of like the ideas that Lowry puts forward, that we're going to have some sort of like digital gated communities and servers that we can personally control. Like it's yeah, I don't really have it fully fleshed out, but like I do see some like merit to what Lowry's talking about with like the cyber dome ideas, and having an immutable commodity, like digital commodity that forces a cost function to activate a system or access a system is going to be an essential, especially in a world where there's going to be both like human and digital potentially adversarial actors in these spaces, whether they're acting on our behalf to do something elsewhere, or if it's an adversary trying to penetrate our systems. Yeah, I think that there's going to be something along those lines that that is going to be enacted, but it's hard to see that far into the future when we are dealing with right now. Like everything's very exciting in the space, and we're seeing all these updates about like nations getting into it, but there's going to be real threats that we're going to have to adapt to. But you don't know what you're going to have to deal with until it happens. So that's why like the anti-fragility argument is essential, and why it keeps proving time and time again that that's it's adaptable, and it's going to adapt whatever comes up, and we're going to figure it out, and we will get past whatever challenges it faces. Like that's the whole idea of the system, is that we have rallied around it because we are confident that it will adapt, and we will adapt with it because we are part of its story.
Is Bitcoin, or like maybe differently ask, what do you think is currently, with all the things going on inside of Bitcoin, what is currently for you the most interesting thing that is going on?
Well, I'm liking watching the developments in the mining. Like the heat punk guys are very interesting. The BitAxe and what's going on with them, like trying to open source a lot of the mining stack, and building the all of the parts right from the hash boards, the control boards, and more like custom chipsets, so that basically anybody can participate in building ASICs and configuring them to their own needs. So that's going to open up a lot of interesting avenues, especially like now we're seeing companies that are literally building them as space heaters. So we're going to see a lot more interest on that front. I find it interesting seeing I didn't really get too much into the Opperturn drama. I watched it from my perspective, and it seems to have passed on, and everyone's just decided it's like too much heat, we're moving on. And it's just another way like the system kind of like it's almost like an immune system that just reacted when things got too heated up and there was too much disagreement. And yeah, it's interesting to see how that stuff plays out. Um, it's another interesting one. The samurai guys, and like the lawfare that's being engaged in that. I don't know if you've spoken to anybody that's involved in that. Like the fact that the the prosecutors had spoken with the regulator and said that they're not breaking any laws and they're still going forward with it, which is very interesting to see why, when there's basically every other instance is starting to be dropped against anybody that's developing like crypto technologies. And that was the worrying thing, is the implications that it could potentially, if they succeed in calling what Samurai was doing like money transmitters, then they want to broaden that into like node runners, and miners are potentially subject to the same rules as money transmission institutions as well. So it'll be, it's an interesting attack vector that can happen against the network, and it would basically apply a lot of the regulations that Elizabeth Warren seems to want to apply on the industry, where it would be, yeah, everybody is treated as if they're a money business, and that is kind of goes against the technology itself. Like we're just transmitting messages back and forth and updating a ledger. Like it gets complicated to treat it like a centralized authority, like a bank or like the Swift network, because it's Bitcoin and everybody's participating. You can't narrow down every one miner. You can't narrow down any one node runner, because it exists everywhere globally all at once, and it's fascinating to see all how resistive it is and how much like support that that this is getting from the community to defend against these intrusion, like unfair intrusions into how it actually works.
And it's important. Like it's super important that we always defend ourselves, and we kind of make clear that Bitcoin is there to separate money and state, and not to be included in the state. It will be included in the state, obviously as an asset, but it's there mostly for giving sovereignty rights, and it cannot be co-opted in any way, shape, or form. And obviously the current system will fight back, or like will have a reaction to that.
It
But long
almost
term, it
seems
doesn't matter.
like both of them are trying to subsume each other right now. Like the Bitcoiners are like, we're rolling in the Trojan horse, and then the the Wall Street and the government are like, oh, we're going to co-opt it. Like they co-opt every movement that doesn't align with them, that's not going to go away. They find a way to kind of sterilize it and make it their own. But I don't know who's going to win this one. But it's two immovable forces really pushing against each other. But I think Bitcoin is more immovable than the state infrastructure.
And it's global.
Yeah, it's everywhere. And like, yeah, and if you don't like, the wrong move is to not participate, because if everyone else participates, like you have no say. Like if you want to be writing blocks, you have to be mining. You have to have some sort of infrastructure that's supporting your transactions getting in the blocks, because you can't be certain that that you will be able to get that block space unless you have your own infrastructure to do it yourself, because everyone else is going to be self-interested in wanting to process their own blocks. And so obviously there's going to be the self-interested like economic miners that will take the highest transaction fees. But yeah, when we do start seeing nation states prioritizing blocks from their own citizens or their allies, then it is going to create an interesting dynamic where, yeah, if you're not playing the game, you're reliant on others to do it for you. Another thing I wanted to just ask, like on the well, not ask, but point out, did you get to see the skull of Satoshi? Because that was an interesting. Yeah, when you were were you in Las Vegas? You didn't see the giant green skull that they had on display?
Oh yeah, that I
Yeah,
heard. That is
because that's a funny one. Because like that was like Greenpeace had their big campaign to change the code, and essentially when I first saw that, my first instinct is we have to have that at a conference. And sure enough, not even 3 years later, it shows up at the conference as a trophy, basically saying that like, yeah, like this was a poorly thought out attempt to diminish Bitcoin, and it didn't work, and we won, and the trophy is ours, and it's now on display at our biggest event of the year. So it kind of goes to show like that, yeah, there's the skull there. It's quite the piece of art. I've got a few like little 3D printed versions of it myself. But
I love that. I literally made 22 hours this exact tweet. I love this reminder. Everything is good for Bitcoin. Even a paid campaign from a shitcoin company turns out to be something good and valuable for the Bitcoin community.
yeah, and it shows when you go up against the Bitcoin community, like especially if you're not yeah, if you're coming at it and you're not with in bad faith, especially with relying on like bad information, then you're it's not going to end well for you. Because yeah, the Bitcoiners, they're very aggressive at learning everything they can about every system that Bitcoin seems to touch. Like, and it was just fascinating to see like as I was getting into Bitcoin mining, just the amount of experts in energy systems and power markets that are being attracted to what Bitcoin mining unlocks and the problems that it solves on all of the inefficiencies that exist in our grid and power systems, that it it's inevitable that it's just going to metastasize into our power system to such a degree that we won't be able to unstick it. Like even if there is like a flip in the US and they do get a hostile government, or there's even other hostile governments. Like I know the EU isn't the most favorable towards Bitcoin mining, except for like a few select nations. But it just goes to show that it's everywhere and it's not going away.
The first time I ever made any money, I got myself from that money a watch. And ever since then, I collect timepieces to remember times where I achieved some milestone. That's why I got the Bitcoin 2025 edition when I went to my first ever American Bitcoin conference. So for me, the Bitcoin watches from Coin Vigilante represents the time that we are living in. For every person that wears a Bitcoin watch, I know they are representing sound money to the outside world. Make sure to check out those amazing Coin Vigilante timepieces down in the descriptions. I love those watches so much. The most important thing for your Bitcoin journey is not buying Bitcoin, but it's how to keep them. And yes, you have maybe the right tools, but how do you actually go ahead and stick it all together so it's the most secure for you personally? Self-custody is a deeply personalized journey, and the Bitcoin way is helping you exactly finding that correct setup for you personally. They are also helping you with securing your own cybersecurity. And if you want to go one step above all that, you can even get a consultation for a Plan B residency. Go to thebitcoinway.com/Robin and you will get a 30-minute free consultation. I know how big of a hurdle it can be to have self-custody, but it's so freaking important to make that first step. We have to make sure it's as easy and simple as possible. And that's exactly what BitBox did. BitBox created the simplest and the easiest hardware wallet to use to get into self-custody. So get yourself a BitBox down from the link in the description. And when you use code Robin, you even get a 5% discount. And one point that I want to just add here is an open system that's compelling enough to bring people in consistently, which Bitcoin is, will always win out against any closed system, even if the closed system is compelling. And then we have closed systems that are not compelling. Like who would like to embrace the euro? If you just break it down to first principles thinking, it's like, yeah, it's a really bad currency, or the dollar, or like any other fiat currencies for that matter. So open system is compelling, will always win out against closed systems that are not compelling. So the fight is pretty clear on what end where I want to put my money towards.
Yeah, and you didn't choose to adopt the euro. You were basically born into it. Yeah, you would be right around the right age where it was released into the system. Like it's what, 23, 24 years old or something when the euro was released. So like even in the context of like Bitcoin only being 16 years old, like one of the other major currencies in the world was only like barely, not even 3 decades old itself. But it did have like a path dependency that it was able to kind of piggyback on the existing financial systems that you had in Europe, and it was just started to displace the local currencies, and then at one point it just became the de facto currency of Europe, and it, almost in a sly roundabout way. But now we have Bitcoin, which is a currency, a money that we can choose to opt into, and it's available like anywhere to us at any time, and it is borderless, and it is beneficial, especially to the people outside of Europe and the Western nations. Like I working through Alex Gladstein's book, the IMF and the Hidden Repression book, and it details a lot of environments where Bitcoin can be beneficial to people that don't have the same capabilities and access to the markets and basically anything that we do. Like hearing the stories of what Gridless does is remarkable. Like some of these places, they're just getting their first light bulbs and their first refrigerators. So to know that Bitcoin is unlocking that for people, and then like the second order effects, there's now these kids are able to educate themselves, and now we can unlock more talent and more minds to produce God knows what new technologies for humanity. So we need, but the key is to bring them the bare minimum of like energy that they need, like to meet those needs. And there's still billions of people that don't even like reach that minimum level, that are still subsisting on like the bare minimum, still like burning wood for fuel, burning like dung and for and it is unhealthy for them. And like in many cases, like their options when they do get access to like natural gas, like that is such an upgrade from what they have been using, and that it is much better for the environment. But there still is a long way to go to transition completely out of hydrocarbons. And like I don't like to disparage hydrocarbons in and as much as like they've brought our society to where it is today, and we owe a huge debt of gratitude to all of the pioneers and the technology that has been used to get us here and has been dependent on hydrocarbons. But we're never going to stop using them, because even the technology that we want to use to displace hydrocarbons, like the windmills and solar panels and even the nuclear reactors, like there is always going to be an element of hydrocarbons used to develop them. So it's like you can't just remove one of the ingredients and assume that everything's still going to be like the recipe is going to turn out the same, because it's an essential component like coal and gas and like these fuels that we have to support our society and all of the things that we can build. It's yeah, all of it comes down to our ability to harness and deploy energy. And then like Bitcoin mining is just, it seems like it's the pinnacle of us refining that energy into a crystallized form that can store it for un an unforeseen amount of time. Like it is harnessing the forces of nature. Like I was thinking about it recently, in that it's a like generating electricity. We're harnessing the forces of nature, whether it's like collecting solar photons, or we're rotating machines by collecting steam and then just creating a magnetic field with copper coils, because that's all generating electricity is just spin a turbine, creates a magnetic field, and then it creates an electron flow, and then we further refine that into computational hashes, and then that is refined into Bitcoin. So like Bitcoin itself is directly like only 4 steps away from our ability to harness the forces of nature at every level. And it is fascinating to start thinking about it at that depth of how it is almost like a natural force that was just waiting to be discovered. And like it's an invention, but then it discovered like almost a new realm of reality that we can now explore, and we're pioneers in that space.
It's so interesting when we see all of these developments that we've talked about, and we see Bitcoin mining making it easier to also build out new energy and power plants. And then we see also how electricity with renewable energy, with nuclear energy, with all those things are kind of getting maybe or probably cheaper over time. Do you think there's a time? I think even Trump talked about it. We will have so much energy in the USA that they will say like stop producing energy. And like I don't like exactly what he said, but something like that. Gary Godona, I think, said that we will have free electricity because we have too much electricity at some point. Do you see that coming, where we have too much electricity?
That is a very well, wouldn't say we will have too much electricity. I'm more aligned with we will have so much electricity that we're going to like it. We're going to have to put it somewhere, and Bitcoin mining is going to be just that marginal buyer of all of that excess electricity. I tossed out this idea on a recent podcast I did. I think it was on with Joe Burnett, and um, that like right now Bitcoin uses what, like a fraction of a percent of the global energy. I think it's something like 0.5, 0.6% is roughly. I foresee a time in the future where Bitcoin is consuming more power on like a nominal basis than all of humanity does today. But at that time, we're going to be generating so much power that it will still be about 0.5 to 1% of all of the power generated by like humanity on Earth, probably in our solar system. God knows by that point we might be starting to branch out even further. But like it's an interesting thought experiment, just like that Bitcoin will be a catalyst for us to build immense amounts of power infrastructure, but because it'll play like the pioneer species, the pioneer load role, it will continually push the uses of that power up to higher and higher uses while just continually filling that margin, and we will never have a limit to how much power we can generate. And yeah, it'll probably cost almost nothing, and it also depends on what we're measuring it from. Like, are we going to start when is the time going to come when we start measuring energy in like sats per kilowatt hour? That's going to be an interesting transition, that is, especially as we start thinking about a more deflationary mindset. Like, I got into an argument on X the other day, like someone was saying that if we allow for deflation to happen, it would be devastating and it would destroy the entire society and would be in Mad Max in no time. And like, I can't accept that as a reality. Like, in as much as Bitcoin exists to like taper that those productivity gains and just collect it into the money becoming more valuable. And yes, we will save more and we will not stop consuming things. We'll just be more discerning about our consumption. But if we have another massive debt bubble pop, that's a massive deflationary event, that's a completely different story. But it almost seems like the argument was like that the deflationary event that happened in the 1930s, that was a bad deflationary event. So deflation is de facto bad. But then the way that Jeff Booth argues about how deflation is just merely productivity gains being accrued to the value of our money, like, that is a totally different way of how it's going to play out. And I think Bitcoin is just going to allow us to slowly transition from this like hyperinflationary environment with fiat currencies that we are working through now, and it's going to push us through to the next phase. But it's just, we're living through that transitionary phase where we're going from an inflationary system to a deflationary system. And because our only experiences historically with deflationary events have been like tragic, like just traumatic, from like the Great Depression, then it it has almost like a cultural bias to it, that is just what people understand deflation bad. And so when you do start thinking about it in a way, the way that we do, it almost doesn't compute with them. But the other thing just about the costs going down, like I was the yeah, are you familiar with the meme of the cost of the house showing it in fiat slowly going up and then the cost of Bitcoin slowly going down? I applied that to a nuclear reactor and it basically works out the same, because it's the exact same idea. Like, I had taken it was in 2021, one of the projects, I think it was in the UK, they were saying it was going to take €1 billion to build this reactor. And then they 4 years later, just earlier this year, they reevaluated and it was like, oh no, it's going to cost 1.7 billion. So in fiat terms, it went up by 70%. And then I was like, okay, I'm going to take those two time points and I'm going to put in what did it cost at Bitcoin in at that point. And if you measured it in terms of Bitcoin, cost went down by 30%. So like, that totally changes like the dynamic of how we look at like the financial and economic structure of these things, because now we can start thinking of, if these companies are applying Bitcoin as their hurdle rate as well, they're going to be a lot more discerning about how they allocate their capital. Like, if it doesn't apply to the core mission and it's just idle cash and it's not going to do better than accumulating like Bitcoin does, it might as well just be held as Bitcoin in a reserve until it's needed for later. Like, we're seeing a lot of like mostly distressed companies and zombie companies are the ones that are kind of attracted to the Bitcoin treasury strategy, but it's also going to be attractive to actual productive companies that have like real products and like a real offering that are also cash flow positive. It's going to be for everyone. It's going to work for everyone, and some will work out better than others, and there's going to be in infinite different configurations on how it can be like assembled with the different like needs of companies, like, and also like where their jurisdictions are and what their products are. And I'm hoping that some of them can start seeing these ideas and it get out there more into the space that I'm interested in, seeing like nuclear power start adopting Bitcoin more. Because yeah, it was exciting when we saw the Talon Energy and TeraWolf project, but there hasn't really been much since then. So I want more. I want more nuclear Bitcoin, and I'm trying to prompt it however I can.
What do you think is the mix between like when you look like 10, 20, 30 years out, the energy mix between nuclear and all the other energy sources?
I think that nuclear is going to make a comeback, and we're going to start seeing a resurgence early in the 30s because there's going to be a time lag. Like they're talking about building these reactors now, but we're not going to see them active until like give it at least a decade, even if they started building today. Um, we see a lot of wind and solar, like their charts are almost going vertical, but I do have the concern that it might end up looking like a shitcoin chart where it's just pumps up. And then if they're not supported by massive amounts of subsidies and credits, can they actually stand on their own? Are they profitable without those supports? Like we need to see that because that seems to be the catalyst that has been driving a lot of their deployment, and then it's getting to the point where it's using like lower quality land, it's requiring more transmission infrastructure, it's requiring more inverters and extra infrastructure required to reliably integrate it with the grid, as what was seen in Spain just a few weeks ago. That power outage, that they had a total blackout, and it was because the frequency of their grid went haywire because they were just getting too much wind and sun at the same time, and then between cloud cover and just variations, like the frequency went out of whack. And typically, most grids, they use the large spinning reserves are what supports the inertia in those grids, and Spain had reduced that to almost 20% of their capacity, whereas like in America, their spinning reserves are almost like 60% of the entire grid, and it's essentially just the turbines all spin at the exact same frequency, and if the frequency starts to diverge from the 60 hertz that the target is, they they the spinning machines will compensate for it and give almost a buffer before any negative impacts can happen on the grid. And it gives operators time to either like isolate themselves from any potentially cascading events, like what happened like in Ontario. Our entire grid went out from a tree fell on the line in Ohio, and then it cascaded to Niagara Falls, and then almost all of New York and Ontario went out. And this was like 23 years ago or something. It was a major event, but it just goes to show that like these systems are fragile, and if they do not have buffers and inertia to support them, that they are at risk of these events. And essentially, it's just like we have to be realistic about how the grids are structured, because putting too much intermittent and non-dispatchable power on the grids, it has its risks, and it starts compromising reliability. Like I'm all for green and clean grids, but not at the risk of compromising reliability. So then, so as back to like the question, events like that are going to cause a lot of reconsideration about the idea of like 100% wind and solar grid. So it's going to bring the conversation back to like what is the ideal mix, and that's probably going to settle on a substantial base load that if they want clean, that's got to come from nuclear. So that'll probably be like 40-50% of the mix, and then everything else on top of that will be supplementary with like the intermittent sources. There'll probably be a lot of batteries. There's places that do stored hydro where the excess power just gets pumped back up into the reservoir of a dam. That's a typical way that power gets stored. And we'll just see a lot more systems that integrate all of these different mixtures, and a lot of it'll also probably be like monitored and managed by AI in real time, because like from what I heard, what happened with the Iberian blackout was that they had seconds to make a decision to cut off and isolate parts of the grid, and before they even had a chance to take an action, like it had already happened. It happened so fast. So it almost makes the impetus to have some sort of like algorithmic management of these systems. Like you still want to have a human in the loop, but like if there was like a sub-second AI monitoring these systems, it possibly could have reacted and pulled some fail safes before any further damage could have happened to the grid. So there's a lot of potential upgrades and technologies that we can add to this, but it also has to be done right, because it does open up a lot of potential unknowns with new technologies that we're not familiar with, incorporating them in our essential infrastructure, which is our energy and our energy delivery systems. But I hate to see countries going like backwards in their energy infrastructure and not being able to provide power reliably when it's needed, anywhere that it's needed. And that is essentially what we have been granted in these Western nations, that we are very privileged to have a working system. It is remarkable how fragile it is when we see events like what happened in Spain last week or last month.
I trust AI even almost even more than humans, especially when it comes to like fast decisions. I for like as an Austrian, as a European, you're not in privilege to have self-driving cars, but I was in Miami for 3-4 days, and there I was driving a Tesla with full self-driving activated, and it just drove me around for 1 hour completely on its own through the city, through the highways, through everything.
Yeah, we're living in the future, man.
We are freaking living in the future. And the thing is, when I was driving, I didn't feel as safe when the AI was driving, because I never drove in America. I don't drive a lot of cars, anyways. Like I'm not a frequent driver, and then it really drives in a very safe but still fast way, where I'm like, okay, like it really knows what it's doing. And it just took me an hour, and I was trusting it more than myself.
Yeah, because it's making thousands of decisions a second, and like we don't, yeah, we're not capable of that. Like we have our sight and our peripherals, and then there's even like blind spots, and like yeah, an accident on the highway not far from where I live just this week, and like and just seeing the stats on the self-driving cars, that yeah, it's improving at an astonishing rate, and I don't know if we'll see it. How long it'll be before we start seeing it where I am up in Canada, because we do have icy conditions and winter conditions. I don't. It's going to take them a minute to adapt to that, but definitely in places where weather is consistent all year round, and worst you have to deal with is some rain, then yeah, it's going to be quicker than we could have imagined.
um, One thing that I'm curious with electricity, because you mentioned the outages, how could, like, if you can just design an electric grid from basically from scratch again, how can we make sure that it's the most robust, stable, resistant against outages, like the most decentralized electric grid?
I like the idea of like a constellation of microgrids. Like it kind of already is that in a way, and the way that like the North American grid got built out, it just patched together and just extend transmission lines here, add a new substation here, add a new power plant here, and it all just kind of got patched together. And we understand how these systems work together well. But the way things are going, especially with the potential of SMRs and the way that a lot of markets that we want to serve power to are fairly isolated from the grid, especially we start thinking about like South America and Africa. Like it's going to be cheaper to build like a power generation infrastructure right in a community rather than extend transmission lines from a central facility out to them. Um, so I foresee it kind of like how the African nations kind of skipped over the the physical phone lines, and they basically everybody in Africa has a cell phone, and they never dealt with having like a wired phone. Like it was very rare. Their technology skipped right over like that telecoms era right into the cellular era. I foresee something kind of similar to that, where these microgrids that are anchored by like SMRs and probably like geothermal facilities, like micro hydro plants in various ways that are anchored by Bitcoin mining, like those microgrids will be these anchors, and then as the opportunities to extend transmission and infrastructure to nearby communities, and then start kind of like linking them together so that they have ways that they're connected, but also able to operate isolated and as as self-sustaining islands for themselves, that they can support themselves should there be an issue outside of them in the wider grid where they don't want to be exposed to a grid outage that happened somewhere like hundreds of kilometers away that can cascade towards their system. They can just cut off with basically just like circuit breakers and isolate themselves and with their own power infrastructure. So I foresee a lot of infrastructure like that developing, but it's going going to happen once we start seeing SMRs more prove their capabilities and start actually getting deployed and finding finding their fit in the market. But like right now, the big challenge is financing these things and getting them over that, demonstrating their first of a kind operating units and working out any troubleshooting kinks before they start getting into mass production. So there's multiple phases to getting them out into like the commercial markets and deploying them internationally. So like we're still easily like a decade away before we start seeing that point, but there's a lot of excitement in like various nuclear companies in the states, publicly traded ones like Oklo and Nano Nuclear, that are progressing through the licensing phase. They've showing progress on their first of a kind units. They're going to probably have operational prototypes within the next 3 or 4 years, and then it's probably going to be a gradually then suddenly vibe to it, where once all this technology finally like reach a maturity point, it's going to proliferate so quickly that we aren't even going to, like, people that aren't paying attention aren't even going to know where it came from. But it's going to happen fast, but a lot of the development's going to happen behind the scenes and kind of in stealth under the radar.
It's so fascinating. It's like in 10 years and 15 years, it will be even more exciting than right now. There's so much happening in all of the things with AI, Bitcoin, and energy. 2035 will be even better than 2025, I feel like.
It's exciting to be a pioneer in a new frontier. Like even just observing those that are like really immersed in the space. Like like you do the podcast and you talk to a lot of people, so you get a lot of insight into what's going on. And I listen to a lot of podcasts, so I've got a whole catalog of experts that are just voices in my head that just fill me in on all of the information and all the updates that are going on. And it is remarkable the amount of technology that's being developed in this space that's going to change everything. And it's we're just waiting for that key unlock moment for people to kind of the usability of it to almost be abstracted into the way that people don't even know that they're using Bitcoin, but it's just replaced everything. Kind of like how the physical phone lines got replaced by digital phone lines and people didn't even really notice. It'll just be something that happens abstracted behind the scenes under the hood, and then that'll just be the new way of things. And people won't even realize that they're using Bitcoin. Like people don't even realize that their pensions are exposed to Bitcoin now if they've got any exposure to BlackRock. And it is kind of funny just to see when when you talk to people realizing that like where we are now, because the last thing they heard was like, oh, Bitcoin was dying, Bitcoin was 20K, oh, Bitcoin went back down to 70K, and then I yeah mentioned that it's over 100K and hit an all-time high, and people don't even it doesn't even register anymore.
It's very true. It's like it's at that point it has been so successful over such a long period of time that they kind of tune out to the success of it and kind of not see it anymore. As we see in like 2017, there was a huge spike in interest, even though we just hit like not even 20,000. And now we hit 100 and what was the max, 12,000, 13,000, whatever. And people are not even 1/3 as interested as it was in 2017, and the retail FOMO was not as big. It's fascinating to see how asleep they are.
No, it's weird because yeah, well, I got attracted by like the original like the FOMO in 2021 when was running up to 60K, and that was very like exciting, and there was just madness everywhere. That was just before all of the FTX. Like I just got in before everything just blew up and started trying to promote it within the nuclear industry. And then you get questions like, well, what about that FTX stuff? And yes, people just commit fraud, but it had nothing to do with Bitcoin. Bitcoin's just an open ledger that we can use how we see fit, and it's like the internet. The early days, it was being used like 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 the claim that it was being used for nefarious things or for like message boards that were unsavory and whatnot. That proportionally in the early days, yes, some of that stuff was higher. But now the positive uses for the internet are just outweigh any potential negatives about it allowing people to communicate with each other that would be communicating about things that are unsavory. So it's going to be much the same in Bitcoin. Like, yeah, in its early years, proportionally, criminals used it to buy drugs on Silk Road. But now BlackRock is accumulating it. Governments and sovereign wealth funds are accumulating it. So it's proven itself to the point that it has way more benefit to our society than the negatives and the perceived negatives that it has out there in like the social discussion. So I hope that more people start catching on, like seeing people like Daniel Batten out there constantly swatting FUD whenever it comes up, whenever some credible institution starts reporting about Bitcoin and uses resources like Alex DeVries, Digiconomist. Yeah, it seems like we just have an immune system that just reacts to that. It makes
It
yeah,
makes
sorry, I don't know where. Yeah,
yeah,
it's just interesting to watch and just see that he just filled that role. Daniel just filled into that role.
we have a really good immune system. It works on its own, and it doesn't need anyone to fill it. If someone falls out, there's someone else coming. If there's a hole filling, there's someone that fills that hole. It's just it's a nice system.
Yeah, when I started, it was more like Nick Carter was filling that role, and now it's Daniel Batten's got that role. So,
True Nick, I haven't heard about him since a long time. Has he
but
gone into altcoins too much?
I don't know. Does his own thing, but like, yeah, when I started in Bitcoin, like he was really compelling arguments and rebutting a lot of the mining FUD and whatnot. But yeah,
Yeah.
he seems to have that torch has been passed on, and now like Daniel Batten is the guy when it comes to busting FUD and mining narratives.
I had him on like just a week ago or something like that, or 2 weeks ago. Was really fun talking with him. I asked all my returning guests the same question. What have you learned since you have last been on the podcast outside of Bitcoin?
Outside of Bitcoin, I learned that I'm a lot more capable than I thought I was. But I was content to be a lab tech and just kind of ride out a simple career until I retired and just do the 9 to 5. But then becoming a Bitcoiner and seeing that there's a lot grander world of opportunity to embrace, and you can just do things. And I've gone to conferences now, and I've been speaking with people all over the world. Like before El Salvador last fall, I was also in Abu Dhabi going to a nuclear conference, and they're starting to be more open to these ideas. They want to learn, they want to understand that there are tools available to solve many of the problems that the sector solves. And nobody was serving in the role of promoting like this specific niche. So I decided that I was going to be the guy. Didn't really decide. I just started doing it, and then it just kind of gained its own momentum. And yeah, now I've got a taste for a more adventurous lifestyle, and I want to pursue something a little more broader than the laboratory. And yeah, like anybody can just start doing something that they're passionate about, and God knows what opportunities will arise from it. The people that I've been speaking to have I've been speaking with some of the most intelligent and interesting people in the world over the last few years, and I would not change a thing.
I love that. And I 100% agree with that. Just from starting my own small podcast, not only that I'm capable of doing my podcast and supporting freelancers with that, the opportunities could come your way. The things that you can say no to that you would have said yes in an instant. Like there are opportunities now coming my way that I say no to. 2 years ago, I would have dreamed of having that opportunity, just because you go out there, put a proof of work in there, and just work really hard. And the community really appreciates that. So I love that point you brought up here.
Well, and you create your own opportunities by putting yourself out there. Like, yeah, if you hadn't have made the decision to go all in, like, yeah, you may not have had the opportunities even present themselves to you. Or you might not have been the person that would have seen or accepted that opportunity should it have arisen. So, like, yeah, the Bitcoin changes people meme, it's definitely real. Like, I am not in any way the same person from 5 years ago. Like, this has been a roller coaster of just like yeah, just a like a going through the personality change and meat grinder of like who was I before and now who am I now? Like, you start asking these questions when before it was just kind of just flowing with the momentum of life and going the flow, showing up at your job, supporting your family. But then, yeah, Bitcoin grabs you and it throws you into a whole new world where you need to find the best in yourself, really.
We have an end routine in the podcast, as you well know, where the previous guest is asking a question for the next guest without knowing who the next guest is. And I just prefaced that question that an Italian asked that question. He asked the question, is pizza with pineapples acceptable?
That is a travesty. That is sacrilegious. My wife would disagree with me though. But yeah, I have never. I love pineapple, but I have never liked pineapple on pizza. I don't know if it's just the texture just doesn't jive with pizza for me. So I like a good meat lovers myself with some mushrooms on it. That is my preferred pizza.
Yeah, pineapple. I don't like pineapple, so that's why I'm probably like the wrong person to even ask that question. But like, I wouldn't put pineapples also on my pizza.
It's a very contentious topic, much like the cast iron and the stainless steel frying pans. Like it's also a good one when the Bitcoiners are bored. You just bring out something random to argue about.
And Bitcoiners really like to argue about diet, about
especially like it's either really exciting for a few days or terrifying for a few days and then boring for months. At least if you're on the price action and whatnot. But like if you're paying attention to what's going on behind the scenes, like there's always something exciting and new going on. But it's a fun ride.
There are definitely seasons where like there's so much going on in like 1 week, and then there's like a month where I'm like, it's kind of calm. Like people are not as interested in Bitcoin and Bitcoin related topics in the Bitcoin community. And then there's like 2 weeks where like everything seems to be happening in Bitcoin all at once. I've in the short amount of time that I did my podcast, the last 1.5 years, I've noticed many of those seasons, and I do prefer the calm season a lot because it allows to like build and strategize and be ready for like the hectic season. And sometimes it's not even deeper. Yeah, and sometimes it's not even connected to the price action necessarily. So usually the price action is correlated to a hectic news season, but it's sometimes there's sometimes just a lot happening and the price not really reflects that. So it's interesting to see that.
I know, it feels like we're all just waiting for like a coiled spring to just release its energy, and nobody knows what's going to happen. And then all of a sudden, price goes down like 3K, and it's like, that's not supposed to happen. But then just like, back up the truck. Do I have any coins in the cushions? Sell my chairs.
Can I take another loan?
Yeah. Yeah, you definitely know you've crossed the chasm when you see the dip and you're just like, where's my money? Why don't I have any money left? Oh yes, it's all Bitcoin.
Really cool. Thank you so much, Ryan, for being such an amazing guest on.
Wonderful talking to you. I love your podcast, all your guests.
Thank you so much. Before I let you go, where can people find you and ask you questions?
Nuclear Bitcoiner on X, Noster, Brian McLeod on LinkedIn if you more on the professional side. But yeah, that's where you can find me, and I will be up to what I've been up to, trying to penetrate the nuclear industry with some Bitcoin mining strategies.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ryan. And also thank you so much for everyone that is watching and listening, for joining us today. As always, I'll be back tomorrow with another episode. Bye-bye.
Thank you.